She was barely breathing when he knelt between her legs. Her chest hitched, slow and uneven, like it might stop any second. Flies hovered low in the grass, drawn to the dark stain spreading through her torn clothes. From a distance, it looked wrong, dangerous, unforgivable. A giant mountain man, alone with a half-conscious girl, miles from town, miles from help. The wind slid through the field and carried her breath away. She smelled of sweat, fever, and something sour that didn't belong in a living body. Silas Thorne noticed that first, before her face, before her age. Infection had a smell, and this one was deep. His fingers caught the edge of the ripped fabric at her waist. He pulled just enough to see where the blood came from, no more than that. The mark running beneath the cloth wasn't fresh and it wasn't clean, but it was angry and dark and spreading fast. The girl stirred, her eyes opened a crack, unfocused. Already tired of fighting? She didn't scream. She didn't try to crawl away. Her voice came out flat, almost bored with fear. "My father did that every night," she said. "If you're going to do it quick." Silas froze, not slowed, not startled. Frozen, for a long second, the mountain went silent. No birds, no wind. Just a man staring at a girl who had already given up on mercy. Silas had heard plenty of things said about him. They called him the butcher in town, but that sentence cut deeper than any blade he owned. It was memory. He shrugged off his coat and laid it over her without asking. She flinched anyway. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. "You're burning up," he said. His voice was rough, steady, not cruel. "If I leave you here, you won't see morning." She didn't answer. Her eyes slid shut again, like the decision had already been made for her. Silas lifted her, careful, awkward, like carrying something already broken. Anyone who saw him then would have sworn they were right about him. A mountain man hauling a girl into the woods. No witnesses, no explanation. His cabin sat low against the slope, smoke-stained and quiet. It wasn't a place built for comfort. It was built for work, and work didn't care about rumors. He laid her on the heavy table in the center of the room, the same table he dressed Elk on and stitched his own wounds on when he had to. Her breathing rattled, shallow and fast. When he reached for water, she stirred again. Her hands twitched. Weak, searching for something to grab, fear snapped through her eyes when she saw metal on the table. "No," she whispered. "Not again." Silas didn't soften his voice. Soft voices lied too often. "If you fight me, you'll die," he said. "If you let me work, you might live." He boiled water. He cleaned his hands slow, the way habit demanded, from beneath a rug. He pulled a wooden chest and opened it. Inside, the tools were wrapped clean, silver dull with age but cared for. This was the part no one in town knew. Before the mountain, before the rumors, Silas Thorne had been a surgeon, army-trained, field-hardened, good enough that men bled less when he was near. The infection was worse than it looked. It always was. He worked fast, precise, cutting away what was already dead to save what wasn't. There was no hunger in his eyes, no curiosity, my only focus, and a quiet urgency that came from knowing time mattered. Her fever spiked, then broke. Sometime before dawn, her breathing slowed. That alone felt like a miracle. Outside, the wind shifted, far off. Something echoed, not close enough to see, but close enough to hear. A voice, then another. Silas stilled and listened. Men carried sound when they were sure they were right. He covered her, turned down the lamp, and stood by the door. If anyone found them like this, there would be no explaining. A dead girl would have been simpler than a living one with a story. Silas knew how this looked from the outside. Man like him, alone with a young woman, and blood on her clothes. He'd seen good men get hanged for less just because a crowd wanted a clean answer, so he did the only thing he could do. He made the room look like care, not secrecy, a clean cloth in plain sight. Boiled water on the stove, a lamp turned low, not out. He wasn't hiding a girl. He was buying her time to live. Before we go further, hear me clear. This story is retold from old accounts, with a few details shaped for clarity and a stronger lesson. And the visuals are I made to support the mood. If you're still here, drop a quick comment so I know you want more stories like this. By sunrise, the girl was alive. Marks, old scars, newer ones, patterns that didn't lie. He didn't know her full story yet, but Bodies told the truth when mouths couldn't. Outside, the sounds grew closer. Boots on dirt. Men talking like they were doing something righteous. If he hit her, he'd be a monster. If he told the truth, she'd be dragged back to hell by people who called it faith. So here's the question that mattered. When saving a life means destroying a lie the whole town depends on. Which one do you choose? Silas didn't sleep that morning. He sat at the table with his back straight, listening to the mountain breathe. Every sound mattered now. Alara slept hard for the first time in days, not the restless kind of sleep that comes with fear. This was heavy, pulled under by exhaustion and pain finally loosening its grip. Her fever had broken, but her body was still weak, like a fence after a storm. Silas checked her breathing every few minutes, an old habit. You never trusted silence too long. The cabin smelled of boiled water and strong liquor, not the drinking kind, the working kind. He cleaned the table again, slow and thorough, even though the worst was already done. A man who rushed after the danger past usually paid for it later. When Alara stirred, it was quiet. No screaming, no panic, just a small sound in her throat, like she was trying to remember where she was. You're safe, he said. He didn't move closer. He stayed where she could see both of his hands. Her eyes opened, cloudy, still scared, but not lost. She tried to sit up and failed. Her body reminded her who was in charge. Don't, he said. You're not ready. She swallowed. Why didn't you? She asked. Silas knew what she meant. Men always knew. Because I'm not him, he said. That was all. He handed her water. She drank slow, like every swallow needed permission. Hours passed that way. Small movements, small checks. No big speeches. He showed her where the water was, where the blanket sat, where the door stayed latched. Control mattered. He knew that better than most. By midday, she could speak without shaking. That was when the questions started. She asked where she was. He told her the mountain. She asked why he lived alone. He said it was quieter. She asked if people were coming. He didn't lie. Yes, he said. Eventually, that answer scared her more than any other. Her hands tightened in the blanket. Silas watched that, and something old twisted in his chest. Fear like that didn't come from one bad night. It came from years. He sat across from her, not looming, not crowding. You don't owe me anything, he said. But if you want to live, you listen to me. She nodded. He showed her how to clean her hands properly. He showed her how to rinse cloth until the water ran clear. He gave her simple work she could do from the bed. It wasn't kindness, it was respect. That night, she woke screaming, not loud, but sharp, the kind of sound that cut through walls. Silas was on his feet before the echo died. He didn't touch her. He stayed where she could see him. It's not him, he said. You're here. She shook, eyes wide, chest heaving. It took a long time for her to come back. When she did, she looked at him like she expected a price. There isn't one, he said. Get some rest. Outside, the mountain didn't care. The wind moved through the trees like it always had. The next day, Silas heard it clearly. Boots, voices, men who believed they were right. He didn't tell Alara at first. Fear burned energy she needed to heal. Instead, he worked. He cleaned her wounds again. He checked for signs of infection. He wrote everything down, dates, patterns, old scars that told stories she never spoke out loud. This was not for revenge. It was for truth. By afternoon, Alara noticed the tension. You hear them too? She said, yes, he said. Her face went pale. They'll take me back, she said. Silas looked at her then. Really looked. No, he said, they won't. That confidence surprised her. It surprised him too. He handed her the leather-bound book. If anything happens to me, you carry this, he said. You do not give it up. What is it? She asked. The truth, he said. That night, torches flickered far down the slope. Not close enough yet. Close enough to matter. Silas packed supplies without rushing. Rushing led to mistakes. He showed Alara a narrow space behind the wall. Not a hiding place, a waiting place. You stay there if things go bad, he said. You don't move until I say. She nodded, jaw tight. She finally asked the question that had been sitting between them. Why are you doing this? She said. Silas didn't answer right away. He rarely did when the truth was heavy. "'Cause I failed someone once," he said, "and I won't do it again." That was enough. The voices grew louder. A familiar tone carried on the wind. Soft, confident, righteous. Alara flinched. Silas felt something settle in him then, a calm that came before storms. He opened the door and stood in the light. Not hiding, not running. Whatever came next would come on his feet. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe and stay with me. Now tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you're listening from. I read those comments because the next choice Silas Thorne makes will change every life on that mountain. Silas stood in the doorway like a fence post. Still. Solid. The kind of still that told the mountain he wasn't moving. Down the slope. Torchlight winked between trees. Men's voices rose and fell. Confident, loud enough to scare anything that listened. They were close, but not close enough to see his face. Silas shut the door and slid the bar into place. No drama, just a simple wooden sound that meant now you had to earn your way in. Alara watched him from the table. She tried to sit straighter, tried to look braver than she felt. Her hand stayed wrapped in the blanket like it was armor. He didn't tell her to be brave. He'd learned a long time ago that brave talk didn't stop bullet. "You can stand," he said. "Not long, but you can stand. I don't want them to hear me," she said. "Then don't talk," he said. "Breathe through your nose, slow, like you're smelling bread." That got a faint look from her, half confused, half annoyed. Silas took it as a win. If she could be annoyed, she was still alive. He moved the kettle back onto the stove. He checked the cloths drying near the fire. He kept his hands busy because his mind wanted to run. Outside, the voices drifted again. One of them laughed. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It was a man laughing because he felt backed up by numbers. Ilara's eyes flicked to the hidden space behind the wall. Silas saw it. "Not yet," he said. "They're still guessing. If you hide too early, you give them a reason to feel right." She swallowed hard. "How do you know?" she asked. "Because men like that always need a story," he said. "If they don't have one, they make one." He crouched near her without crowding her. He kept his voice low. "Listen to me. You're going to do two things tonight. You're going to drink this. Yeah. You're going to sleep if you can." She stared at the cup. Her hand shook when she took it. The liquid tasted bitter. Medicine never tasted like dessert. Silas said, "If it does, somebody's lying to you." That pulled a small breath from her. Not quite a laugh, but close. Silas didn't push it. He wasn't trying to be charming. He was trying to keep her from falling apart. A few minutes later, she set the cup down. Her eyelids drooped. The fever had broken, but her body still felt like it was learning how to be alive again. Silas stayed near the table, sharpening a knife he didn't plan to use. The sound was steady, calming in a strange way. Stone on metal. A simple rhythm. Alara watched him for a while. Then she spoke. Soft. "Why are they here?" she asked. "They don't even know me." Silas paused the blade. "They know what they're told," he said. "Told by who?" she asked. Silas looked at her and waited. He let her choose her own words. He wasn't going to drag it out of her like the world always had. Her throat moved like swallowing glass. "My father," she said. Silas said nothing. He just waited. "He's the preacher in town," she said. "Reverend Malachi Vance." The name landed heavy in the room. Not because Silas respected it, because he understood what a name like that could do to a crowd. A preacher could point at a man and turn him into a devil before supper. A preacher could point at a girl and turn her into a sinner before breakfast. Ilara's voice stayed low. "He tells people I'm troubled," she said. "He tells them I need saving." Silas kept his face calm, but his jaw tightened. "Saving," he repeated. Alara nodded once, like she hated the word. Then her eyes went down to the blanket. Her shoulders curled in on themselves. Silas didn't ask for details. He didn't need them to know what kind of man Malachi was. The scars on her body had already said enough. The way she apologized with her eyes had said even more. She spoke again, quieter. He said God wanted it. He said it was my duty to obey. He said if I told anyone, so they'd blame me. Silas exhaled through his nose. Slow, controlled. Anger didn't help a patient. Anger helped a grave. Alara looked up suddenly, like she expected Silas to doubt her. Worse, to believe her and still not care. Silas set the knife down. I'm not here to judge you, he said. I'm here to keep you breathing. She blinked fast. A tear ran down her cheek without sound. She wiped it away like she was mad at it. He won't stop, she said. If he finds me, he'll drag me back, or he'll make sure I don't talk. Silas reached under the table and pulled out the leather book again. He placed it where she could see it. This is why I wrote it, he said. Not because I like writing. Writing makes my hand cramp. That earned another tiny change in her face, a flicker of something almost human again. Silas continued. It's a record, dates, patterns, old injuries that match new ones. It's the kind of thing a decent man can't ignore once he's seen it. Alara stared at the book like it was a snake. People won't believe me, she said. Silas nodded. Some won't, he said, because believing you means admitting they looked away, but some will. And all I need is a few, outside. A voice carried closer, clearer now. It rose like a sermon and fell like a threat. Even through the walls, it had that smooth confidence that made weak men feel strong. Alara went stiff. Her breathing changed. Short, fast. Silas held up a hand, not touching, just signaling. That's him, he said. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her face answered for her. Silas felt something cold settle behind his ribs. This wasn't just a search party. This was a performance. A preacher needed a stage, and the mountain had become one. He walked to the small window and looked out through a crack. Torches moved in a line, several men, maybe a deputy, maybe the sheriff himself if the preacher had pulled the right strings. Silas whispered without looking back. You can walk a little, he said. Can you hold yourself up for 10 minutes? Alara swallowed. I can try, she said. Good, he said. Trying is what we got. He brought her boots closer. He didn't put them on her. He set them within reach. Then he turned away, giving her privacy even now. She worked slowly, shaking hands, jaw clenched. Pain flashed in her eyes, but she didn't cry out. Silas listened to the sounds outside. He counted steps. He judged distance. He pictured angles, not because he wanted to fight, because he refused to be surprised. When Alara finally stood, her knees wobbled. She gripped the table. Her face went pale. Silas kept his voice steady. Lean on the wall, he said. Not on me. The wall won't get nervous. She gave him a look that said he was impossible. Then she did it. 1 step. 2 steps. A slow shuffle toward the hidden space. Silas opened it and stepped aside. There was room to sit. Room to breathe. A small lantern. Water. A blanket. The kind of preparation that told her he'd thought about her survival, not his comfort. Alara looked at him from the opening. Her voice trembled. What if they burn the cabin? She asked. Silas nodded once. If they try. We'll deal with it, he said. But they won't yet. They want to feel righteous first. Fire is what men use when they run out of words. Outside. The preacher's voice rose again, closer now. Silas heard his name spoken like a curse. He heard the word butcher carried on the wind like it was proof of evil. Alara flinched at the sound. Silas looked at her and spoke low. You listen to me, he said. You're not going back to him? Not alive, not broken, not ever. Alara's eyes filled again. This time she didn't wipe the tears right away. She just breathed. Slow, like smelling bread. Silas stepped to the door. He picked up the leather book. He tucked it under his arm like a Bible of his own. He paused with his hand on the bar, because he knew what came next. If he opened that door with her hidden inside, they would call him guilty anyway. If he kept it shut, they would call him guilty and feel brave doing it. And then Silas heard something that made his blood run colder than the mountain air. A second voice joined the preacher outside, calm and official, saying one simple thing. Sheriff's business. Open up. And somewhere behind that calm voice, Silas could already hear the rope being measured. Silas didn't reach for his gun. He reached for the door bar. And he asked himself one question that would decide everything. Was the sheriff there to listen to the truth or to hang the butcher before sunrise? Silas kept his hand on the bar, and he didn't breathe deep. The sheriff's voice outside sounded calm, but calm could still carry a rope. Torchlight flickered through the cracks in the logs, and the cabin felt smaller than it ever had. Alara stayed behind the wall, quiet as a mouse in winter. Silas could hear her, not with his ears, but with the way the air felt. Fear changes a room, even when nobody speaks. Sheriff's business, the voice called again. Open up, Silas. Silas leaned close to the door and kept his voice steady. Sheriff, he said, you brought a preacher and a mob to my doorstep. That doesn't feel like business. That feels like a show. A few men muttered. Someone laughed, then stopped when the preacher spoke. Reverend Malachi's voice slid through the night, smooth as oiled leather. Silas Thorne is holding my daughter. Malachi called. He's a dangerous man, and he's done wicked things on this mountain. Open the door and let righteous men do what must be done. Silas stared at the wood grain in front of him, like he could see the future inside it. He'd heard that tone before in army camps, and in towns that wanted blood, a man with a holy voice could make a crowd feel clean while doing dirty work. Silas spoke again, louder now, so every man could hear. Sheriff, he said, that girl isn't a criminal. She's hurt. If you rush this, you'll kill her. If you listen, you might save her. The sheriff hesitated, and that hesitation mattered. It meant the sheriff still had a mind of his own, at least a little. Malachi filled the gap fast. She's sick in the spirit. Malachi said, she's been tempted, and she's tried to run. God put a father in charge for a reason. Silas felt his stomach turn. He didn't need details because he understood the trick. Turn harm into discipline and call control a blessing. Silas lifted the leather book under his arm and spoke like a man reading a verdict. Sheriff, he said, I have records, dates, injuries, patterns that don't happen by accident. You step in here with that preacher leading you, and you're not doing law. You're doing whatever he points at. A man outside shouted, what records? Another voice said, the butcher's lying. A third voice sounded unsure, like it had never heard a butcher talk that way. Silas waited and let the crowd argue with itself. That was the first crack in Malachi's power. A crowd that starts thinking, stops obeying. The sheriff spoke, closer now. Silas, he said, I'm asking you plain, is there a girl in there? Yes, Silas said, and she's alive because I kept her alive. Malachi's voice sharpened. You hear that? Malachi called. He admits it, he took her, and he kept her. Silas nearly smiled, but it was bitter. That preacher didn't want the truth. He wanted a sentence. He wanted the kind of sentence that ended with a grave. Silas lifted his voice again and aimed it at the men, not the preacher. If you think I'm a monster, he said, you should be careful how you act tonight, because monsters aren't the only ones who ruin lives. Good men do it too, when they follow the loudest voice. A long pause followed. The torches crackled, and somebody shifted their boots in the dirt. Silas heard the sheriff breathe out. He's weighing it, Silas thought. He's weighing the preacher against his badge. Sheriff, Silas said, I'll open the door a hand's width. You can see me, and you can hear me, but you don't come in with that crowd, and you don't bring that preacher to my table. Malachi barked a laugh. He's bargaining, Malachi called. Like a thief in daylight. Sheriff, break the door and take her back where she belongs. Silas's jaw tightened hard enough to ache. He kept his voice low and sharp. Sheriff, he said, if you break this door, you'll be stepping into a sick room. You'll be stepping into blood and fever, and you'll be stepping into the truth. Are you ready for that? Or are you just ready to make a hanging easier? The sheriff didn't answer right away. Then he said, open it. Silas, just a crack. No tricks. Silas slid the bar up, slow, and pulled the door open only a little. Cold air spilled in, along with torch smoke and the smell of men. Silas kept his body blocking the view inside. The sheriff stood a few paces back, lantern in a hand. He was older than Silas expected, with tired eyes and a mustache that had seen too much. 2 deputies stood behind him, and a line of townsmen filled the shadows. Malachi stood at the edge of the light, face calm, like he was already forgiven. Silas didn't look at Malachi. He looked at the sheriff and spoke plain. Sheriff, he said, that girl is hurt bad. If you rush her, she'll die. If you drag her back to the man who did it, she might die slower. Malachi stepped forward, just enough for the lantern to catch his collar and his clean hands. Sheriff, Malachi said, my daughter is confused, and she's been corrupted by this beast. We'll take her home, and I will cleanse her. Silas finally looked at him, and his voice went colder. Cleansing isn't what you do, Silas said. You don't cleanse with bruises. You don't cleanse with broken ribs. You don't cleanse with fear that makes a girl say your name like a prayer and a curse. A few men shifted again, uneasy. Those words hit places they didn't want touched. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. Silas, he said, if you're accusing a preacher, you better have more than anger. Silas lifted the leather book, but didn't hand it over yet. I've got more than anger, he said. I've got a record, and I've got the girl herself, alive, breathing, and scared of one man more than any other. Malachi's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. They flicked to the cabin, like he could see through wood. For the first time. Silas saw a crack in the holy mask, not rage, not grief, hunger. The kind that wants a secret buried. The sheriff took a step closer. Where is she, he asked. Silas didn't answer that fast, because once the sheriff knew, Malachi would know too, and once Malachi knew, he would not stop. Silas chose his words carefully. She's right here, he said, and she's not going anywhere with that man. Malachi's voice rose, louder, sharper, meant for the crowd. Sheriff, he shouted. He's defying God and law. If you let him, you're letting evil win. The crowd murmured, and the sound rolled like a wave. Silas watched the sheriff's face, hunting for the moment the badge would choose a side. Then the sheriff did something Silas didn't expect. He raised his hand, and the crowd quieted. He looked at Malachi, and his voice stayed even. Reverend, he said, you'll step back. This is my call now. The night went still again. Even Alara's breathing seemed to pause behind the wall. Malachi's smile tightened, and he stepped back half a step, but his eyes stayed fixed on that door crack, and his hand drifted under his coat. Silas saw it. A small movement, easy to miss. Unless you'd watched men lie for a living, Silas's blood turned to ice. Because Malachi wasn't reaching for a Bible. He was reaching for a gun, and the sheriff, still talking, hadn't noticed yet. Silas moved before Malachi finished the motion, not fast, certain. He shifted his weight just enough to block the line between the preacher and the door. No one else saw the hand under the coat yet. No one else knew what that meant. Silas did. Sheriff, he said, steady and loud, you might want to tell your men to step back. The sheriff frowned. Why would I do that, he asked. Because if anyone fires a gun right now, Silas said, that girl inside will die. The word die has a way of cutting through noise. A few torches dipped. One deputy shifted his stance. Malachi's hand stopped moving. Just for a second, but his smile stayed in place. You hear that? Malachi said to the crowd. He's threatening us now. This is the devil talking through him. Silas didn't raise his voice. That was important. Men who shouted sounded afraid. No, he said, that's a doctor talking. And I'm telling you what happens to weak bodies when strong men lose control. The sheriff looked from Silas to Malachi. His eyes narrowed. Reverend, he said, keep your hands where I can see them. Malachi laughed softly and lifted his hands. Of course, Sheriff, he said, I would never bring violence into God's work. Silas watched the preacher's eyes, not his hands. Hands lied. Eyes told the truth. Inside the cabin, behind the wall. Alara heard the change in the air. She didn't know what was being said, but she knew danger when it leaned closer. Her fingers dug into the blanket. She focused on breathing, slow, the way Silas taught her. Silas spoke again, this time to the men. You all know me, he said, or you think you do. You've seen me cut meat, stitch wounds, and keep my mouth shut. If I wanted harm, you wouldn't be standing this close. A murmur ran through the group. Not agreement, not yet. But doubt. The sheriff took another step forward. He could see into the cabin now, the table, the clean cloths, the smell of boiled water. This doesn't look like a crime scene, he said slowly. Malachi's smile faltered, just a touch. Appearances deceive. He said, evil often wears a tidy face. Silas nodded once. That's true, he said. It's why I look past faces and read bodies. He opened the leather book and held it where the lantern light could touch the pages. He didn't shove it forward. He didn't beg. These marks, he said, are not from one night. They're from years. They follow patterns. Patterns don't lie. The sheriff leaned closer. He didn't take the book yet, but he looked. Silas kept talking, calm and careful. This isn't about me, he said, and it isn't about belief. It's about whether you want to hear the truth from a man who's seen bodies break. Alara listened to the voices rise and fall. She heard the preacher speak her name once, soft and sharp at the same time. Her stomach twisted. That voice had owned her silence for too long. Something inside her shifted. Not strength, not courage, something smaller. A refusal. She stood up slowly, every joint screaming. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes until the room stopped spinning. Outside, the sheriff reached for the book. Just as his fingers brushed the edge, Malachi spoke again. "Sheriff," he said, "if you read the ramblings of a mountain butcher over the word of God, you'll regret it." Silas turned his head fully toward Malachi for the first time. "You don't sound worried about your daughter," he said. "You sound worried about your reputation." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the men. That landed harder than any accusation. Malachi's eyes hardened. "I worry about her soul," he said. Silas shook his head once. "You never worry about what you don't believe you can lose." The sheriff took the book fully now. He flipped a page, then another. His face changed, slow but real. "These dates," he said quietly, "they line up with things folks talked about. Bruises, broken ribs." Malachi stepped forward without thinking. "Sheriff," and he snapped, "that's enough." The sheriff raised his hand again. "Reverend," he said, "you will stay where you are." Inside the cabin, Ilara took a step toward the door. Her knees buckled, but she caught herself. She knew what she was doing. She knew the risk. Silas heard the sound behind him, a faint scrape, a breath that didn't belong to him. He didn't turn right away. He trusted his timing. Ilara spoke from inside the cabin. Her voice was weak, but it carried. "Sheriff," she said. Every sound stopped. The sheriff stiffened. The crowd leaned in. Malachi went very still. She took another breath. "My father did this to me," she said. "For years." Malachi's face broke then, just for a heartbeat. Rage flashed where holiness had been. Silas turned and saw her standing there, pale, shaking, alive. He felt something tighten behind his eyes. Not tears, something older. Alara kept going, slower now. "He told me God wanted it," she said. "He told me I was dirty without him. I ran because I wanted to live." The sheriff stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. Malachi found his voice again, loud and desperate. "She's lying," he shouted. "She's sick. She doesn't know what she's saying." Alara looked at him, straight on. For the first time in her life, "You taught me how to lie," she said. "This isn't it." The sheriff closed the book. His jaw worked. "Reverend," he said, "you're coming with me." The crowd shifted. Some stepped back, and some looked away. Malachi laughed once, sharp and ugly. "You think you can touch me," he said. "You think these men will let you." Silas saw it again, the hand under the coat. Faster this time, he moved, not toward Malachi, toward Alara. He put himself between her and the preacher without hesitation, and that was when Malachi finally pulled the gun. The gun came up fast, too fast for most men to react. Silas didn't reach for his own weapon. He stepped half a pace, turning his body so the preacher no longer had a clear line to Ilara. It was not a heroic move. It was instinct, trained long before the mountain ever knew his name. Someone in the crowd shouted. Another man cursed. A torch fell, hissing in the dirt. The sheriff raised his voice, sharp and final. "Put it down, Reverend." Malachi's hand shook. Just a little, not fear. Anger. The kind that comes when control slips. "You see what you've done," Malachi said, pointing the gun at Silas. "You've turned them against me. You've poisoned my own child." Ilara stood behind Silas, one hand pressed to the wall to stay upright. Her knees trembled, but she didn't step back, for the first time. The gun was not the worst thing in front of her. Silas spoke without raising his voice. "You're not taking her anywhere," he said. "Not tonight. Not ever." Malachi laughed, thin and sharp. "You think you can stop me," he said. "You're just a butcher with a cabin." Silas nodded once. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm standing." The sheriff stepped forward, slow, careful. "Reverend," he said, "put the gun down. This ends now." Malachi's eyes flicked to the men behind him. Some looked unsure, some looked sick. None looked eager anymore. That was when Malachi understood something too late. Faith worked best when people didn't have to look too closely. His finger tightened. Silas moved. not toward the gun, toward Alara. He reached back and pressed her down, firm but gentle. "Get low," he said. The shot cracked the night. Loud, short, quick. The bullet tore into the cabin wall, inches from where Silas's head had been. Splinters flew. The sheriff lunged. A deputy grabbed Malachi's arm. Another man slammed into him from the side. The gun hit the ground. Someone kicked it away. Malachi screamed then. Not a holy cry. Not a righteous one. Just raw panic. "You can't do this," he shouted. "I am her father." The sheriff twisted his arm behind his back. "Right now," he said. "You're a man who fired a gun at a witness." Silas stayed where he was. One hand still braced behind Alara. He felt her shaking slow, just a little. Breathing mattered. The crowd pulled back. Men who had come looking for a monster suddenly found one too close for comfort. The sheriff snapped cuffs onto Malachi's wrist. "Read him his rights the long way," he said to the deputy. "I want every word." Malachi's head dropped, then snapped up again. He fixed his eyes on Alara. "This isn't over," he said. "You belong to me." Silas stood then, slow, deliberate. "No," he said. "She belongs to herself." Malachi laughed again, but it had lost its edge. "We'll see," he said. The sheriff turned to Silas. "You okay?" he asked. Silas nodded. Then he looked back at Alara. She nodded too. That was enough. The men began to move away from the cabin. Torches dipped, voices lowered. As Malachi was dragged toward the trail, he twisted once more. "You think you've won," he said. "You don't know how this town works." Silas watched him go and felt no victory, only a familiar weight. Alara sank back onto the bench inside the cabin. Her strength drained all at once. Silas brought her water and waited until her hands steadied. "You did good," he said. She looked up at him, eyes tired but clear. "I was scared," she said. He nodded. "So was I." That surprised her. Outside, the sheriff returned alone. His shoulders looked heavier than before. "We'll take him to town," the sheriff said. "There will be questions. People will argue." Silas didn't respond right away. He had expected that. Sheriff continued. "I'll need that book." Silas handed it over without hesitation. He watched the sheriff cradle it like it weighed more than paper. "This won't be quick," the sheriff said. Silas glanced back at Lara. She was watching him, waiting. "We're not in a hurry," Silas said. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be back," he said. When the night finally quieted, Silas closed the door and slid the bar back into place. The cabin felt different now, not safe, but honest. Alara broke the silence. "What happens next?" she asked. Silas sat across from her, rubbing his hands together like he always did when thinking. "Next," he said, "we make sure you heal. Then we make sure the truth doesn't get buried." She studied him for a long moment. "You really were a doctor," she said. Silas smiled faintly. "Once," he said. She took a breath, then another. Outside, the mountain held its breath too. Because the gunshot was only the beginning, and by morning, the whole town would be climbing this slope. Morning came slow on the mountain, not with light first, but with sound. Boots. More boots than the night before. Voices carrying uphill like the town itself had decided to stretch its legs. Silas stood at the window and watched them come. Not angry, not afraid, just tired in a way that settled deep in the bones. Alara sat at the table, wrapped in a clean blanket, hands around a tin cup. She looked better than she had any right to after the night they survived. Still pale, still weak, but her eyes were steady now. "They're coming back," she said. Silas nodded. "They always do. When people smell blood or truth, they don't like to stop halfway." He moved through the cabin with purpose. Not packing to run. Preparing to stand. He checked her bandages. Clean. No new fever. That mattered more than anything happening outside. "You don't have to be part of this," he said. "If you want to leave before they get here, I'll walk you to the ridge." Alara shook her head. "If I run again," she said, "they'll say I'm guilty forever." Silas didn't argue. He respected decisions made with open eyes. By the time the first men reached the clearing, the sun was high enough to show faces. Not a mob this time. Neighbors. Men Silas had traded with. Men who nodded to him once a year and pretended not to see him the rest of the time. The sheriff came last, walking slower than the others. He carried the leather book under his arm like it weighed more than it should. Silas opened the door before anyone knocked. He had learned long ago that waiting made people feel invited to imagine things. The clearing went quiet. Silas stepped aside just enough for them to see inside. Not the hidden space, just the table. The clean cloths, Alara sitting upright, very much alive. That changed the air. Alive people complicated stories. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Morning, Silas." "Morning," Silas said. The sheriff looked past him at Alara. She met his eyes. She didn't look away. "Reverend Vance is in a cell," the sheriff said. He spent the night shouting scripture and threats in equal measure. A few men shifted uncomfortably. That didn't sound like holiness. Silas said nothing. He waited. The sheriff continued. "I brought the book to town. I showed it to the doctor. Old man, bad eyes, but he knows bones and scars." Silas watched Alara's fingers tighten around her cup. The sheriff took a breath. He said, "Your notes are solid." He said, "Nobody gets injuries like that by accident." A low murmur ran through the men. Not outrage. Recognition. One man cleared his throat. "I remember when she fell off the church steps," he said. "Broke her rib. They told us." Another man frowned. "And the winter before that," someone said. "She was sick for weeks." Silas watched the truth do what it always did when given space. It spread. Alara stood then. Not fast, not steady, but she stood. Silas moved half a step closer. Not touching, just there. She looked at the men one by one. Some couldn't meet her eyes. Some tried. "I didn't come here to ruin anyone," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I came here because I wanted to live." Silas felt something loosen in his chest. The sheriff nodded slowly. "There will be a hearing," he said. "It won't be clean. It won't be quick," Silas answered without hesitation. "We're not going anywhere." The sheriff looked at him. "That's what worries me," he said. "This town doesn't like mirrors." One of the men spoke up, a rancher with a weathered face. "You saying she stays here?" he asked. Silas nodded. "Until she's strong enough to choose otherwise." The man looked at Alara again. Really looked. Then he nodded once. A few others followed. Not all. Enough. The sheriff handed the leather book back to Silas. "Keep writing," he said. "Every check. Every scar that fades." Silas took it. "Always did," he said. The group began to drift back down the trail, quieter than they came. The sheriff lingered. "Billy," he said, "you know this makes you a target." Silas smiled faintly. "Been one for years," he said. When they were gone, the mountain breathed again. Alara sat down hard, the strength leaving her all at once. Silas brought her water and waited until her hands stopped shaking. "They believed me," she said. "Some did." Silas said, "Enough to matter." She looked around the cabin. "I don't know what I am now," she said. Silas leaned back against the table. "You're alive," he said. "That's a good place to start." She watched him for a long moment. Then she asked, "Why do you really live up here?" Silas didn't answer right away. He rarely did when the truth was close to the surface. "'Cause down there," he said, "I followed rules instead of people, and it cost me someone I loved." Alara didn't press. She understood silence better than most. The afternoon passed quiet. Silas showed her how to clean the instruments, how to fold cloth so it stayed clean. Small things, useful things. As the sun dipped, a rider appeared at the edge of the clearing. Not the sheriff, not a deputy, a young man from town, breathless, fear in his eyes. He didn't come all the way up. He just called out. "They're gathering again," he said. "Not everyone believes the sheriff. Some want their own justice." Silas closed his eyes for a second. Then he opened them, calm as ever. Alara looked at him. "Is it going to get worse?" she asked. Silas nodded once. "Yes," he said. Then he added something she didn't expect. "But now, they'll have to come through the truth to get to you." Outside, the wind shifted, and far down the mountain, a bell began to ring. The sheriff had calmed the town once, but not everyone wanted calm. The bell kept ringing long after the rider disappeared. Not fast, not urgent, just steady enough to tell the town something had gone wrong. Silas listened from the doorway. He had heard bells like that before. They never rang for mercy. Alara sat on the bench, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't ask what the bell meant. She already knew. "They're calling people together," Silas said. "Not for church." She nodded once. Her shoulders lifted with a slow breath, then settled. Silas moved the table closer to the wall and cleared a space near the window. He didn't barricade the door. Barricades told people you were afraid. He laid out clean cloth, water, and the book. The leather cover looked darker now, like it had soaked up more than ink. Alara watched him work. "You always this calm?" she asked. Silas shook his head. "No," he said. "I just learned what panic costs." The light outside shifted. Late afternoon sliding toward evening, that time of day when men decided who they were going to be before dark. The first voices reached the clearing before the feet did. Low, angry, certain. Silas stepped outside before they could knock. He didn't carry a gun. He carried the book. The men stopped when they saw him. Not all of them. Enough to change the shape of the moment. A rancher stepped forward. "We're here to settle this," he said. Pitch nodded. "Then let's settle it with the truth," he said. Someone laughed. Someone else spit. "Where's the girl?" another voice called. Silas didn't answer that. He raised the book instead. "This is what you're really here for," he said. "Not her. Not me. This." The sheriff came up the trail behind them, breath heavy but eyes sharp. He stopped beside Silas. "This isn't a trial," he said. Silas glanced at him. "No," he said, "but it's close enough for now." The crowd pressed in, not touching, just close enough to feel each other breathe. Silas opened the book and read a single line, a date, an injury, a quiet fact. He didn't explain it. He didn't argue. He let it sit. Then he read another and another. The sounds changed, no shouting now, just shifting feet and swallowed words. Alara stepped into the doorway, not all the way out, enough to be seen. The crowd stiffened. Some men looked away. Some stared too long. She spoke without raising her voice. "I didn't come here to shame anyone," she said. "I came here because I wanted to live." Silas felt the ground steady under his boots. One man spoke up, uncertain. "Reverend says you're confused." Alara looked at him. Then she shook her head. "I was confused when I thought pain was love." She said, "I'm not confused anymore." The sheriff cleared his throat. "That's enough," he said. "We're not hanging anyone tonight." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Disappointment, relief, both at once. Silas closed the book. He looked at the men, one by one. "You can leave," he said, "or you can stay and listen." Most left. A few stayed. When the clearing finally emptied, the mountain felt larger again. Silas went back inside and shut the door. He leaned against it for a moment. Alara sat back down, the strength leaving her. "That was worse than last night," she said. Silas nodded. "Because last night they were angry," he said. "Tonight they were deciding." She looked up at him. "Deciding what?" she asked. "Who they want to be when no one tells them," he said. The sheriff knocked once and stepped inside. "I'll keep him off the mountain tonight," he said. "But tomorrow won't be quiet." Silas met his eyes. "Tomorrow never is." The sheriff hesitated. "You did the right thing," he said. Silas didn't answer. He had learned the right thing didn't always feel right away. After the sheriff left, the cabin settled into a heavy quiet. Silas made soup, nothing fancy, just enough to keep a body going. Alara ate slowly. Every bite felt like a small victory. When she finished, she looked at the book again. "Will it end him?" she asked. Silas considered the question. "No," he said, "but it will end the story he told about himself." She nodded. That seemed to matter more. Outside, the sun slipped behind the ridge and the bell stopped ringing. Silas cleaned the table and set the instruments back in their place. "Some habits never left you." Alara watched him. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. Silas shook his head. "No," he said. "I think about building something better right where I am." She smiled faintly at that. The night came down gentle this time. No torches, no shouting. But Silas knew better than to trust quiet. because somewhere down in town, a man sat in a cell, furious and patient, and men like that didn't forgive. Silas looked at the door, then at the book, then at Ilara. Tomorrow, he knew, the truth would be tested harder than ever. The night passed without footsteps on the trail. That didn't mean peace had come. It only meant the mountain was holding its breath. Morning arrived with a pale sky and a kind of quiet that felt earned. Silas woke before the light, as he always did. He checked the stove, the door, the book. Then he checked Ilara. She was asleep, breathing steady, her face softer than it had been since he found her in the field. Healing was never loud. It happened in small signs that only patient eyes noticed. By midday, word came up the mountain the way it always did. Slow, twisted, heavy. The preacher was staying in his cell. The sheriff was not letting him out. People were arguing in the street instead of the church. Silas listened and said nothing. Truth didn't need a parade. It needed time. Ilara stepped outside for the first time since the night of the gunshot. She moved carefully, like the ground might still betray her. The wind touched her face and she closed her eyes. "I forgot what air felt like," she said. Silas nodded. People forget lots of things when they're trying to survive. The days that followed didn't come with a clean ending. They rarely do. The sheriff called it a hearing, but the town treated it like a war over what to believe. There were looks from town. There were whispers. There were men who would never forgive Silas for forcing them to see something they preferred not to. But there were also others. A logger with a split hand who showed up one afternoon. A woman who brought bread and didn't stay. A boy who left bandages on the step and ran away before anyone could thank him. The cabin changed shape without moving an inch. A table used for skinning turned into a place for stitching. A chest of tools turned into a promise. Ilara learned quickly, not because she wanted to be useful, because learning gave her something back that had been taken. Choice. Silas taught her how to clean wounds, how to listen to a body instead of forcing it. He taught her that pain spoke, but it didn't always tell the truth. One evening, as the light slid low and warm, Ilara asked him something simple. "Why didn't you leave when you could have?" Silas thought about it. About the rules he once followed, about the people he lost by doing everything right and nothing kind, 'cause staying was the first honest thing I did in a long time. He said. She nodded. That answer made sense to her. The preacher was tried months later, not clean, not perfect, but public. The book mattered, the scars mattered, and the voice of a girl who refused to look down mattered most of all. Silas didn't go to town for the verdict. He stayed on the mountain and worked. When word finally reached him, it was enough. The story Malachi Vance had told about himself was over. Ilara stood beside Silas when she heard. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, breathing like someone who had walked out of a long tunnel. Time moved the way it always does, forward. The cabin became something else entirely, not a hiding place. A beginning. Men came up the mountain with cuts and broken fingers. Women came with children who had fevers and nowhere else to go. No one called Silas the butcher anymore. They called him doctor. Ilara became his hands when his grew tired, his eyes when his own missed things, not because he needed help, because healing was better when shared, and that is where the story ends. On paper, a year later, folks stopped calling it Silas's cabin. They called it the place you went when you didn't want to die. A miner came in with a crushed finger and left with a hand that still worked. A child came in, burning with fever, and left quiet and warm again. Ilara kept the water boiling and the cloth clean, and she didn't flinch at the sight of blood anymore. She wasn't fearless. She was free. And Silas, for the first time in a long time, looked like a man who could sleep, but not in meaning. Now let me step out of the mountain for a moment and speak to you directly. I've read a lot of stories like this over the years. Some are louder, some are bloodier, but the ones that stay with me are always about the same thing. A moment when someone chooses to stop repeating harm. Silas didn't save the world. He didn't fix a town. He stood his ground when it would have been easier to walk away, and Ilara didn't become strong overnight. She became honest, and honesty, I have learned, is a deeper kind of strength. If you're listening to this and carrying something heavy, ask yourself one quiet question. What would change if you stopped surviving and started choosing? Maybe it is choosing rest. Maybe it is choosing truth. Maybe it is choosing to protect someone when no one is watching. Another question worth sitting with is this. When the crowd moves one way, do you follow or do you stop long enough to look? I believe most people are not cruel. They are just tired. And tired people sometimes mistake silence for safety. Silas taught me something important through this story. You do not need permission to do the right thing. You only need the courage to live with the consequences. And Alara reminds me of this. Healing does not mean forgetting. It means remembering without being owned by it. So here's my question for you. What truth are you avoiding because it feels inconvenient? And one more. Who needs you to stand still instead of stepping aside? If this story gave you something to think about, take a second and let me know. A like tells me these stories still matter. A subscription tells me you want to hear more like this. I don't take that lightly. I picture people listening late at night, early in the morning, in quiet rooms and long drives, and I'm grateful you chose to spend that time here. If you want, leave a comment. Tell me what part stayed with you. Tell me where you're listening from. Because stories like this were never meant to end with the last word. They are meant to walk with us quietly into whatever choice comes next.